Well, everybody, welcome. Welcome to this talk. Over the course of this summer, we wanted to bring in a few guest speakers to talk on different things. Everything from keeping a childlike faith to this topic, which is depression and anxiety. So I could think of no one more qualified than one of the counselors here at St. Simon and Jude to speak with us on this. Laura Aguire is I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm good. Oh, that means I should have to go up now. Great.
Yeah. I'll trade you.
Okay. I'm not looking at this way. So, hello everyone. Thank you guys for coming all the way over here, considering the torrential rain that's going out right now. So, as David said, my name is Laura Aguire. I am one of the counselors with Rejoice. So, Rejoice Counseling has several locations throughout the Houston area. We're as south at St. John the Baptist and Alvin, and I may have missed, there's two down there that we are, so I may have switched both of them. But one of the northern parishes that we serve is St. Simon and Jude. So we have two of our counselors that are on site every week. I'm here every other week. Our other counselor is here every week. So, little tiny spiel about Rejoice Counseling. So. You gave me the hardest topic to talk about, not really, but the most dire. I feel it's the most dire. People get to talk about faith and all the beauty of it, and I get to talk about depression and anxiety. So, bear with me. I will be talking about, what it looks like for a lot of people, depression and anxiety, and then, maybe talk about what are some things we can do to help our loved ones, some things we can do to help ourselves if we are struggling with depression and anxiety, as well as what are some things we can just kind of do in the meantime. So, because I have my notes, and I found out 5 minutes ago it was being recorded, I was like, yep, I need my notes.
Do you want to stand for your phone?
Okay. It'll just look like I'm on my phone. So what is depression? So most people think of depression as, I'm just feeling sad, I don't feel like doing anything. I've heard a lot of people tell me they feel depression is they just don't want to get out of bed, which is true for the most part. 1 in 5 people tend to suffer with depression or anxiety or just any mental health illness. And it is a daily struggle for a lot of people. For some, it's something mild, and for others, it's something that is very severe. Depending on how people take care of it is what, how we manage it going forward. So a lot of factors that go into our mental health is our physical health, our emotional health. Spiritual health is a huge one. I can say this, going from a secular environment to a more faith-based environment, having faith helps so much more when you have it, when you're struggling with mental health. I love how you're just standing there. I adore you. So, what are some symptoms of depression? Those are the bigger changes that tend to happen, that people tend to see. So it's changes in sleep. That's one of the key things I look at when I am talking with someone and they're saying they may have depression. Like, okay, well, what's your sleep look like? If you used to get a ton of sleep and now you're not sleeping at all, then yeah, that might be an issue. Or the other way around, if you used to sleep normal and then you're not sleeping at all or sleeping too much, that's different. So it's just whatever seems out of the normal for you. Another thing to notice is change in appetite. If you're used to eating all the stuff on your plate and then all of a sudden you're no longer wanting to eat as much or you don't feel as hungry, that might be a red flag. Same thing the other way around. Some people stress eat. Pandemic kind of highlighted that as well as, the not eating part. So changes in appetite is another big red flag of, okay, something's off, something's going wrong. A happy example I give of that is people who are, getting ready for a wedding or getting ready for a big, wonderful event. Stress happens in good events too, where it's people just tend to not eat because they're so busy. Sometimes they're busy and sometimes it's just they say, I don't feel like eating. A couple other things is lack of concentration and lack of energy. So if you feel like there is something going on where like you normally are able to pay attention, you just have trouble focusing. That's another red flag there too. Something to think about. Lack of energy. If you're used to being the most energetic person in the room, or at least being bubbly for the most part, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't feel like getting out of bed, or I just have no energy. This was more like for me, it wasn't depression, but it was just pregnancy, where it was like I got out of bed and I was like, I really don't feel like doing anything. So I got up, got on the couch, and I just fell asleep all over again. I was like, I know that's not depression, but dang, this is probably what it feels like. That's not good. The other thing too, a couple of things is, aside from lack of energy and just lack of concentration, one of the big highlights that I look at is lack of passion. When I say lack of passion is when you lack the passion or the desire to do the things you love to do. Like if you love to go bowling, if you love to go running, and all of a sudden you're just like, I don't feel like doing it anymore. It just doesn't get me going. That is a huge wake-up call for a lot of people of like, I need to talk to somebody, I gotta change a couple of things. Hopelessness or feeling guilty. I see a lot of this too, where one of the bigger things I ask a lot of potential clients or people or clients in general is, what are the things you look forward to? Is there anything you do look forward to? And if there's moments where, people say, I don't look forward to anything, it's like, okay, we can work with that. Or if they say, well, there's one thing I'm looking forward to, we can work with that too. It just depends again on mindset, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Changes in movement, physical aches and pains, those are other moments where someone is saying, like, where someone gives the impression of, maybe struggling with depression. So it's like, oh, I'm not as active anymore. And you kind of see it with the people you live at home. If you know your family member is like, they're always active, or they're always moving, and then all of a sudden they're not, then it's kind of a good moment to say, hey, I want to have a talk with you. On that note, what's coming to mind right now is, for those that still have like DirecTV or, on-demand stuff, one of the commercials that for some reason pops up on mine anyways is, it's like, what to do when someone is, not being themselves, and it's like trying to get them to have the conversation of like, what's going on. It's like, yeah, that's kind of sort of how it goes. Not necessarily like that though. And the last one, and this one is kind of also the big one for a lot of people, is suicidal thoughts, or thoughts of harming themselves. There's a difference between wanting to harm yourself and then wanting to end your life. Both are usually for different reasons. Both are still harmful no matter what. What are some causes to depression? Okay, you can hold my hand if that makes you feel better. Trauma is a big thing. So if you live through something like a pandemic, I tend to highlight this now, this is probably the best thing for me. At least saying a pandemic is the best example. Living through a pandemic can be traumatic for most. I know for a lot of people, it even doesn't just affect them mental health wise, but also physically. I remember, 2008, 2009, when it was the H1N1 virus. Some parents are old enough to remember that, kids probably not. When noticing afterwards that cases of diabetes actually increased after that. So it affects us physically too, just how we react to things. So trauma, that's how trauma goes. It's not always just like a car accident or seeing something fatal. It's sometimes something quote unquote small. Genetics is another thing to look at too. When I talk with someone, I tend to ask them, hey, does anybody else in your family struggle with feeling sad more often than usual or something like that? Some people say yes. And so that kind of gives the image that there is a family history. Maybe there is some stuff going on. So it's not always just something that you're going through. Maybe it is something genetic, and it's just our body chemistry, which it happens sometimes. Life circumstances, again, it goes back to, maybe living a trauma or just what is something that you've lived through. Life changes that I tend to highlight for a lot of people is, marriage, divorce, new member in the family, someone passing away, moving. Other instances, that means something big, that are a life transition. Those are also moments when someone is more susceptible to depression. The best way I describe that for someone is, if I were to tell you guys to go to Dallas without a map and navigate driving to Dallas, a lot of people would be going, I don't want to do that. I would be one of those people. I need my GPS. So that's kind of how navigating life transitions without any support looks like. And so that's when we're more susceptible to anxiety or to depression. The other thing too is medical conditions or drug and alcohol use. Medical conditions sometimes, depending on if a person has chronic illness, like I said, diabetes can be not saying diabetes itself is one of them, but something like diabetes where you're having to live with it, or there's constant things that are changing throughout your day just because of your health, that also affects your mood. Because if you're constantly feeling sick, then it's not as easy. It's doable to be in a good mood of what all's going on. Same thing with drug and alcohol use. It affects your brain in so many ways, and so you're more susceptible to feeling depressed. So when I mentioned the symptoms earlier, like what are the changes, what are like the things you notice in yourself, those are usually the moments where most physicians or most mental health practitioners would say, okay, it does look like there is depression. Now with depression, it varies differently. There's mild, there's moderate, and then there's severe. And I can't remember the other one it's like bigger than severe. But depending on each one is, what a practitioner would say of like, okay, this is what we need to do to handle it. If it's mild, sometimes it just takes a matter of maybe adjusting to how we respond to things, adjusting to how we want to take in those things that are coming at us. When it's something more severe, most physicians do visit medication. Now, the only people that can prescribe medication are doctors or psychiatrists. I cannot do that, which is why I'm not a doctor. I don't want to mess with that. Other treatments that people use for dealing with depression, psychotherapy, that's what I do, sitting down, I have different modalities of how I work with that. Easy things that you can do without having to go see a therapist or a doctor is getting your body moving, at least for 30 minutes a day. It sounds cheesy, but it's the best thing that I've seen that helps other people, because when you exercise, it elevates the dopamine in your body, therefore making you feel good. If anyone's seen the movie Legally Blonde, when she says exercise gives you endorphins, endorphins make you happy, I'm not going to finish the rest of that quote, but y'all know what I mean. And that's sort of how we kind of self-treat our own depression. Kind of like if we're to fall down and we scrape our knee, we're not going to say, well, there it is. I mean, we can sometimes, but most of the time we'll go, okay, we'll get a Band-Aid, and that's what we'll do. So that's a quick fix for it. So exercise is the same way for when we feel like we're having a bad day. Some people use brain stimulation therapies, so that depends on the person, but sometimes just getting your brain thinking. So if it's like, okay, maybe watching TV is not the best way to deal with having a bad day. I'm not gonna lie, I do that sometimes, but other times it's more of like reading a book, doing a puzzle, or even just interacting with someone around me, just making my brain work a little bit. Now, depending on in the area of the U.S. where you live in, for example, Seattle, where it's raining all the time, or right now, Texas.
I lived in Alaska. It's horrible.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Welcome to Texas, where it rains now.
Yeah.
You brought it, didn't you? I'm kidding. So with that, a lot of people, what they do up north, because it's raining all the time, there's not a lot of sunlight, is they do light therapy. And that one's actually real easy to do. You buy a special light fixture, and that emits what feels like sun rays and makes you feel a little bit better. With that said, one vitamin that is very essential for our health is vitamin D. We get vitamin D through food, we get vitamin D through the sun, and with vitamin D, it elevates our mood, it helps us feel better, gives us more energy, therefore we're less susceptible to feeling depressed. That's a little bit on depression. Now for anxiety. So anxiety, same thing. It's about 7% of people in the U.S. struggle with anxiety. Anxiety is sometimes can go hand in hand with depression, because I've seen some people that say, well, they feel depressed, but then they feel anxious because it's like, oh, I got to get all this stuff done because I didn't do it because I was just sitting on the couch or I was just laying in bed. So it kind of, some people teeter back and forth with both of them. But anxiety, this one, I'm not saying I have fun with anxiety, but anxiety is my favorite thing to work with. Because anxiety, the symptoms with anxiety are sometimes not always confused with someone who's very active, but sometimes they are. So for symptoms of people who are very anxious is you feel jittery. So most people that I know, they tend to like bounce their leg a little bit if they're sitting and they're like, I can't sit still. So it's like, okay, that's not necessarily anxiety, but I mean, that's why sometimes you can get confused. Another one is feeling tense or jumpy, kind of like, like if I were very anxious, I'd be worried that someone is like about to jump in the door right now. Like I'm on edge. That's what someone with anxiety feels like. With that said, they're a little bit more irritable than usual. So it's kind of like, because they're already on edge, they're more irritable and like they're ready to like pounce at whatever can come at them. The next one is their heartbeat pounds a lot. That's one of the other physical symptoms. So again, it gets confused with like normal, like, oh, I just exercise a lot. That's why my heart's beating super fast. And so a lot of people want to confuse that when it's different depending on the situation. The next one is anticipating the worst, thinking of the worst case scenario all the time, all day, every day, and not stopping to think of like, well, maybe it could not be this bad. So anxiety kind of makes you think of the worst case scenario. The way I also tie it with faith is that I think of, it's painted by Rembrandt, but in the Bible, it's when the disciples are on the boat with Christ and he's asleep during the middle of a storm. So anxiety is pretty much like where the disciples on the boat and Christ is just taking a nap and it's like, what is going on? How are you not freaking out with us? And so a lot of it is, especially with faith, is part of that work is learning to trust, learning to let go of that control. Because when we let go of that control that anxiety tells us we need to have, things tend to be a little bit easier. Other symptoms of anxiety tend to be shortness of breath, having trouble breathing, headaches, stomach issues. So, I mean, I like pointing out the stomach issues, especially with people who are anxious, because it's like, oh, if you have, trouble going to the bathroom or you're going too much, that's kind of also a big red flag of, physical symptoms of anxiety. And kind of like depression, your environment and genetics also affect your anxiety. If you've had parents, grandparents, or just people who raised you who are kind of anxious, who are kind of like, all right, let's go, 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 it kind of breeds that for someone younger. Not saying that it's not important to be on time, but it's also knowing when to have that flexibility. And then environment, again, when there's the anxiety of the unknown. I know with the pandemic, a lot of cases of anxiety kind of increase because it's that unknown. It's what we don't have control over. And just like with treating depression, same things can be used with anxiety. Maybe not light therapy, that's a little different, but it's those same things that anyone would work with a mental health practitioner, they would do the same thing with anxiety as they would with depression. And depending on the other things too. Like I said, there's also mild anxiety, moderate anxiety, severe anxiety, and then there's generalized anxiety disorder. So that's when medication may be needed, as well as, talk therapy, support groups, people who are supportive. With that said, how can we help ourselves and help the people around us? Well, first of all, how we can help ourselves is by learning about it, learning to understand it. It's kind of like when you're a little kid and, you think there's a monster under your bed, but in reality it's the sweater that was balled up and the sleeves are sticking out, that's what the monster is. But you turn on the light and you see it there. That's kind of how we learn how to deal with our own anxieties, our own depression, and knowing, okay, how can I deal with this in the future? Or maybe it's not so scary, or it is manageable. For a lot of people, when they hear that maybe they suffer with a mental health illness, it's scary. It sounds scary initially because it's the big question: what does this mean? What does this mean for me? And I know earlier I mentioned mindset, and that's why mindset is so important going forward. So, I mean, I've had clients come, say to me, it's like, I am depressed, or I have depression, and again, it's changing that mindset of like, maybe you're depressed, or maybe you are a person living with depression. So it's knowing how to change that. One of the best things I love doing is, and if anyone's ever had me as a therapist, or if anyone ever will, they basically will hear me say of like with family members, they'll tell me, oh, so-and-so does this, they do that, oh, they leave a mess, or like, with a toddler, they'll be like, oh, they always throw their food on the floor. And I go, your kid is a genius because they know how to get your attention by throwing food on the floor. So it's knowing how to change that mindset, reframing things and looking at it through a different lens. Because if we're stuck seeing it through one lens, it's really hard to see it through other lenses. So that's why practicing things like that is important with healing. Knowing your triggers and stressors. So it's knowing the things that are going to bug you. It's knowing things that are going to scare you or going to stress you out. For example, speaking in front of people and knowing you're recorded. Could be anxiety provoking for some, I don't know. So knowing what is coming kind of gives you an idea of what to do later on. So if you know you're going to be dealing with like a family member who stresses you out, it's like preparing yourself beforehand, going, okay, if they critique me, you know what? I still make good food. I am good at taking care of my kids. I know how to drive. All these little things you can say for, like, working on saying for yourself that are positive. I'm going to highlight positive, because we can think of negative things all day. But working on the positive to at least build yourself up. So when someone tries to say something negative, it doesn't hit as hard. It's building that armor. Or if driving stresses you out, going, okay, I'm going to drive with my windshield wipers on because it's raining. I'm going to definitely use my signals, make sure my lights are on. And, make sure I pay attention to street lights so that, I don't accidentally go on a red light. Seeking therapy is also a good one, obviously, because one of the benefits going to therapy is good because you get to bounce ideas off of a clinician. Now, we don't get to tell you what to do. That's the fun part about therapy is I don't get to tell you what to do with your life, because what works for you is not going to work for him, or what works for her won't work for the person in the back. It is literally catered to however you need it to be. Staying healthy, like I said, getting that exercise. Also eating right, which studies have shown that when you eat the right things, it actually also improves your mental health. And also think of, fueling the engine in your car. You're not going to, if you have a diesel truck, you're not going to put, unleaded gas, the lowest grade? Yeah, unleaded gas in there because it's not going to run right. Obviously, I don't have a diesel truck. And so, if you're not fueling your car with the right things, it's not going to run right. Same thing with our own bodies. If we're not fueling ourselves the right way, we will not be running at our highest capacity. Doesn't mean you can't not indulge every now and then, but knowing what you're putting in your body for the most part is what's crucial. And it's not just talking about food, it's also talking about, what you're watching, what you're reading, who you're talking to as well. And this brings into the next part, like, who is your support group? When I say support group, I don't mean like support group like people that you would meet once a week, but people in your network, people who are going to support you at home, friendships here at the church. Who are those people that are in your corner, cheering you on, supporting you in whatever you're doing? And of course, avoiding drugs and alcohol is good too, because what I mentioned before of how it affects depression and anxiety, it kind of revs it up or makes the depression worse. Now, so that's how we can help ourselves. Now, how do we help someone who is struggling with depression or anxiety? knowing the signs. So again, it's also getting to know, okay, what does depression look like in someone? What does anxiety look like with someone? Or bipolar or PTSD. When we know those warning signs, it's easier to know what they look like in our loved one. So that way we're able to say, hey, what's going on? Is everything all right? I noticed you're having a bad day. You weren't happy to see the dog when you came into the house, little things like that. Playing a role in treatment. So that means getting, if, as parents, and I make my parents involved in therapy with their kids. That doesn't mean they're in session with them every week, but it is getting to know, like, okay, what's going on in the kid's life and how can parents also help their kids? Because one thing I love about families is it's like a clock. It's not just one person is in charge of their own. Everybody is like a little cog that makes a family work. So it's not just one person that may need to change. It's maybe just something in the environment as well that has to change too. How are we dealing with the problems at home? How are we dealing with stresses that happen in life? And that way we can motivate ourselves as a family to go forward even stronger. Communication, again, reaching out, speaking kindly, especially speaking kindly, and being patient with our loved ones. I know it can sometimes be aggravating of like, okay, you've been feeling this way for so long, I need you to snap out of it. It doesn't always work that way. And so a lot of it is learning to be patient. You are able to gently confront them, be like, hey, you can be honest and say, this is getting a little frustrating for me too. Not what you're going through, but how this is affecting you. Knowing how to say the words in a good way. So one of the things I wanted to talk about as well, so that's mostly how depression and anxiety affect everybody, what you can do, and then how you can help your family members that are struggling with it too. One thing that I also like to give some people, especially if they're struggling with anxiety or depression, there is an inventory, a life stress inventory called the Holmes Race Scale. There's one for adults and there's one for kids. And what it does is it looks at major changes that have happened within the last year. You add all the points up and it kind of tells you how much at risk you are for, depression or anxiety. So for adults, one of the biggest life changes that an adult can have is death of a spouse. Cannot tell you how much stress that could cause someone. Or even from there, it goes like divorce, marital separation, someone is in prison, someone passes away who isn't a spouse, personal injury or illness, like getting in an accident, getting married. Those are being fired, getting together with a partner, or retiring. Those are the top 10 changes that those are the top 10 that can cause the biggest changes. To even the minor ones of going on vacation, the holidays. Let's not even talk about that for a minute. It should be higher on the list, I say. Or just like minor violations of the law, which is like getting a ticket or something like that. That's also a stressful thing, obviously. That's for adults. Like for youth is death of a friend, death of a parent, divorce between your parents. Hitting puberty can be stressful. Relationships between young people, breaking up, getting together, all that stuff. Those are also things that can be stressors in life. Other things that are stressors for kids that aren't as great but still up there are, trouble with teachers, seeing your family go into debt, especially if kids see that can be a stressor. Changing schools, changing homes, moving, stuff like that. Going on vacation as well. It's slightly the same as parents, but some things are a little bit different. Now, depending on how a person scores, it's like, all right, these are minor stresses. Maybe talking would be okay, but maybe changing some things in the routine to where it can be as severe as you're greatly at risk. Maybe it is important to talk to somebody. And that's it. That's all I got.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.